there's times when we're like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Do I need to push them more? Do I need to give them more breaks? What is it? But we really need to get to the point where we're focused in on the small improvements and the small wins and not the 100% we've attained it all.
Hi, welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, where our goal is to help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Let me take just a minute to ask you to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or watch, including YouTube. And if this podcast has been encouraging to you, please leave us a good review. Each review really helps. One of the many things I love about life is making new friends. And Ro Uwague is one of those people I experienced an immediate bond with. I met Ro for the first time in February at a Homeschool Foundation Summit hosted by BJU Press Homeschool, the sponsor of this podcast. She lives in New Jersey, where she homeschools her 3 sons. This is what I love about Ro, just one of the many things. Her journey into homeschooling was sparked by a deep conviction that she believes is God's calling in her life. Currently, she is the host of the Ro's Resource Room podcast, offering tips and strategies for home-centered education to listeners in Pennsylvania, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Alongside productivity coaching, she consults nonprofits on family building and strategic partnerships. She's passionate about building a supportive homeschooling community and connecting with others who share her values. Ro, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It is my absolute pleasure, Zan. Thanks for having me.
Well, it was so much fun to meet you in Greenville. And like I say, I just feel like I have this new best friend from that time together. It was such a bonding time and so great to know you. So I want to talk about some of the things you're doing in the homeschooling community. But first, let's back up and I want to hear your story of how you got into homeschooling and why you feel like this is God's calling for you.
Absolutely. So in the New Jersey landscape, there are a lot of things coming out of the pipeline, and there are just some things that we didn't want to expose our children to. So way before my children became public school age, my husband said to me, Ro, we can't put our kids in public school. We need to homeschool. And his version was a little bit different from the traditional homeschool. And it was more that we were working and someone, a tutor, would come into the home, share, teach the kids, and that would be their version of homeschooling. And I remember us moving 10 minutes from where we used to be to Jersey City, which is the most diverse city in America.
I did not realize that. So that's an interesting fact.
It is. And there were just so many things happening. And we're like, public school is free, but we know we cannot afford to put our kids in public school. So when we bought a house, there was a private Christian school just 1 block away. And I'm like, this must be God. It's so convenient. It's so close. And we enrolled them in private school. We said, we'll just keep them there until it's actually time for them to start their official studies. And I had such an urge, such a conviction that I needed to pull the kids out of school. And I did that. And I told my husband, I really think God wants me to do it, not for us to outsource it, not for us to just have someone in the house doing it, but actually for me to do it.
Okay, Ro, how did you come to that conclusion all of a sudden? I mean, what was going on inside of you to make you willing to make that commitment?
That's such a good question, Zan. I don't think I can actually put it in words of, first this happened and second this happened. It was really this unction, really this feeling that I just couldn't shake. Kind of like you hear something and you're like, oh, that's great. And then you keep hearing it over and over. And I'm like, God, are you trying to tell me something?
Yes,
And at
yes.
that time, then I had just quit my job. I was building my coaching business, and I was like, okay, God, let's talk about this. I'm working on my business, right? Did you not get the memo? This is what I'm doing. So when he started talking about homeschool, then I was like, absolutely not. But I could not shake the thought. I could not shake the feeling. I could not shake that urge. I knew with all I knew that he wanted me to.
So was that daunting to quit your job? I mean, first of all, you quit your day job, your outside the home job.
I did.
And then you came home to really work on your business. And it looks like you gave that up in some measures to homeschool. Was that a scary prospect for you?
So from the financial side, I've got to this place where we just trust God, right? Like the numbers never make sense. We moved from renting a 3-bedroom apartment at a significant amount and literally tripling our expenses, putting the kids in private school, me quitting my job, and everything was always met. So we got to a place where we just trusted God, right? Like that's just what we did. But from a personal standpoint, I really thought I was going to build a business. Things were actually looking really good. I was getting these amazing corporate clients and I was really enjoying it. But my concern wasn't just the walking away from the corporate piece. It was more, I don't want this to break me. And every mom says, oh, I don't want to mess up my kids. It wasn't so much like that piece. It was, I don't want to crumble under the pressure of doing this.
In addition to taking care of your own kids. I mean, that is a load. That's a
It
huge
is.
load. So did you back down or did you get out and your kids were still in private school at this point. So they were
Correct.
still out of the home a good part of
Correct.
the day. Okay.
And the house was clean the entire time they were gone, Zan. I'm still
Yes.
working on that piece.
Yeah. No science experiments growing in the refrigerator.
I'm like,
No,
it's safe to drink,
that's right. Not wondering which surface you're going to clean off tonight to eat
not
supper
stepping on
on.
Legos.
Yes, that's right. There is a lot of peace. There's a lot of surface peace when your house is clean and a little empty, but there are other things that come with that peace.
Absolutely. So I heard clearly and I said, we have to do this. He was completely on board. We pulled the kids out and I started, looking around for curriculum, which is such a trap.
Okay, all right. So you pulled the kids out. Was this mid-school year then, or?
Great question. So this happened around November. I gave them a 2 weeks notice because they had Christmas coming right up. So I said, after the Christmas holidays, the kids will not be returning to school. So it was right as soon as I heard and I was clear and my husband was on board, I let the administration know.
So now you're preparing to homeschool. Did you know any homeschoolers at this point in time?
I knew one family. I met them. And when I say I met them, I overheard, I was eavesdropping on a conversation about homeschooling. And I approached the lady and I said, I heard you talking about homeschooling. Can you share more? And she came to my house. She told us all about the curriculum she was using. And she made it seem really accessible and really, not that scary. So that was good. I don't know if you know this, Sam, but I lived in China for 2 years. And there was a missionary family. They had 2 boys. At that time, I was probably 20, so I never thought of the fact that the kids were probably homeschooled. I just thought, oh, these kids live in China with their parents. So that was probably my first experience.
What were you doing in China, Ro?
I was teaching English to middle school children and to some of the local political leaders.
Oh, interesting. So were you married at that point with
I was
kids?
not.
Or you
No, it was
you were
just
a
me.
single gal? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you heard about homeschooling in China from missionaries or
Yes,
from
it was a missionary family. They had 2 sons. And then fast forward when I was married, maybe a year or 2 before the pandemic, I met a family in Vacation Bible School who talked about homeschooling. That's all I knew. I didn't have any myths, any preconceived notions. I just had these 2 very different experiences, but I never had a judgment. I never had a desire or a lack of desire. It was just all I knew.
Yeah, interesting. So, what piece of the puzzle did you learn from the family in China, and what piece of the puzzle did you learn from the family in the States?
So from the family in China, there was definitely myth that I now hear all the time about socialization. And I honestly don't think it's because they were homeschooled. I think that was just their personality because the parents were actually very similar, like very reserved. So I remember when I started homeschooling, people would say, "Aren't you concerned about socialization?" And in the beginning, I would get a little concerned, like, what do you mean? Like, my kids are socialized. They go to the bank, the post office, the library. They see kids all the time. They see adults. And then fast forward and people ask me, I would say, I am concerned. And that's why I pulled them out. So to answer your question,
That is a fabulous answer.
thank you.
Fabulous. That's right.
So with the other family, what I really gleaned was the flexibility and the ability to make it a biblical worldview and have Christ at the center. I think a lot of times we do Bible and then we do the real stuff. With this, I could do Christ at the center of everything, right? Like geography and God created the mountain, science, like everything I could weave God in.
Yes. Yep. That's pretty amazing. I worked for Broadman and Holman Publishers in the early 2000s. They were developing a homeschool product line. And during that time, they later ended their homeschool division. But during that time, I did some research and I found exactly what you're saying. In the Harvard Rules and Precepts, they said their goal was to lay Christ at the bottom of all sound learning and knowledge. And so it's really amazing to see us come full circle back to the legacy our founders left us, really. And then here's the other piece I love. You were talking about socialization. When we often talk about the Pilgrims, and they were persecuted in England for their religious beliefs, so they went to Holland because they had religious freedom there. But they didn't like the way their kids were being socialized by the Dutch culture. So they moved back to England in 1620 and came to the United States, where they knew they would not just have religious freedom, but the freedom to raise their children in the environment they chose. I mean, they were choosing socialization as the reason to come to the New World because they already had religious freedom in Holland. And so you're in really good company.
Thank you so much.
But we don't realize those things because we've forgotten our history.
That's true.
And it's really important to go back and read the place that a biblical worldview had in our founding documents and in our history. So anyway, we digress, but I love all the things you're sharing with us. So let me ask you this: has socialization been a problem, or are your children happy as clams?
I think over socialization is the problem. Zan,
I
we
agree
were
with you.
so overcommitted. I remember we were in guitar class, we're in piano class, we were in soccer, we were in this, we were in that, we're doing this. And I was like, guys, look at this schedule. We have to roll back. You have too much going on. So I am absolutely not concerned about socialization. I mean, if you're saying that your kids being with you is a bad thing, then that's fine. Let it be, right?
There were so few homeschoolers when we started homeschooling, and there were no co-ops, no resource groups, anything like that. But still, our kids had such a full life because they did what we did. And, we were involved legislatively because of the homeschooling law, but kids just tend to do, if their parents are leading an interesting life, they'll lead an interesting life, and I really believe that. Okay, so what do your children do now? Do they still take some classes, music classes? Are they playing soccer? What are they doing now?
So they're in one co-op that's both academic and social. And then they do something called Royal Rangers, which is like Boy Scouts, but just Christian.
Oh, that's great. Now, I've not heard of that one. It's exciting to see all these alternatives showing up for our kids as more and more people, I think, have their kids at home and are looking for those things.
And I try to let them know, like, the family is the unit. Like, we are your foundation. Everything else is just extra. And, because we have that 2-year gap, they're best friends, right? The older boys, they just play with each other and they are enamored with the baby. So it just works.
What is your husband's role in your homeschool?
So he is absolutely the spiritual leader. There are times when I would do something, maybe like a curriculum that's spiritual or anything that I would work with the kids. And he is the one making sure that they have the spiritual foundation. And I'm not just talking about taking the kids to church on Sundays. I'm talking about leading worship sessions, talking to the kids about character and integrity, things that we would miss out on as a result of having them out of the house 8 hours per day. Like, I know sometimes it gets stressful and the yellow bus looks really, really good. But some of these conversations we have at the dinner table or just anytime, like in the car, we'll have a conversation and I'll say something to the kids and then he'll say something, and stream Christ back in. We were watching The Hobbit the other day because we have a tradition where we do a read aloud. Either we take turns reading or we do the audiobook and reading and then we watch the movie. So we finished reading The Hobbit and we were watching the movie and my husband said, "Bro, pause it." And then he asked them a question and the answer had to do with pride goeth before a fall. So he was bringing the proverbs in, he was bringing the character in, the spiritual gems. That's absolutely his role. And sometimes he's a principal. He's telling me what to do. Yeah, but he's very hands-on with them.
Yeah, that is so great. That is one of the things that so I do a workshop on how conversation builds education and discipleship in our children. I just butchered the title of my own workshop, but it's all about the power of conversation. And one of the things I talk about is either read alouds or audible books because they allow you to read on a vocabulary level or comprehension much higher than the kids could do on their own. It exposes them to new vocabulary words and you're all in the same place. So you can stop and have that conversation like that. And the great thing about audible books is you can do it in the car.
We do a lot of that. Yes. Yeah, we'll even do like history, read alouds, and the kids really enjoy it. Even when we're doing The Hobbit, we were doing a lot of audio in the car or like before bed or at some other time we would listen. And I remember the next day my oldest son woke up, he's like, "Mom, I finished The Hobbit." He went like 10 chapters ahead of us. Like, okay, you can listen in, but don't spoil the story because we're not there yet.
Isn't that great? It's so great to see your kids bond over things like literature and
Absolutely.
good stories and all of that. So, all right. So, one of the things I want to talk to you about, Ro, is learning beyond the desk, as you call it, and I love that the power of experiential education. I just did Jenny Urich's podcast with her, the 1,000 Hours Outside gal, and we were just talking. I mean, when you homeschool, the world is your classroom, and it's a pretty glorious classroom, all in all.
It really is. I remember learning things in school where maybe they were talking about the apple, they teach the different parts of the apple, the seed, the core, all of that. And it was never someone bringing in an apple into class. You're looking at a textbook or you're looking at a picture. And I'm like, how much more fulfilling would it be for you to actually bring the apple in class? And then how much more experience could you get from actually going to the farm and understanding the process and seeing the physical product? So for us, what we try to do is anything that we're learning, we make it very practical. Whether it's geology and we're going to a museum, or if we're learning about history and there's a monument, I'll take them to see that. But I think it's really important to just make sure that it's not just about the book, but that you're teaching through all different platforms.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. So, what are some of your favorite field trips that you've taken?
That's a tough one. We went to Washington's Crossing, so the boys actually saw the actual boat that George Washington was in. They were able to dress up like people from that time. They really love that one. We do a lot of farm field trips. We've done aquariums when we're doing science. A favorite one, that's a tough one.
Or any, really. I mean, they're all, when you're out with your kids, it's like they're all favorites.
Yeah, but they really enjoyed Washington's Crossing, like the whole conversation, the whole car ride back. They were talking about different things in history and his character and why George Washington is their favorite president. It was a really rich conversation.
Yeah, that is so great. And really, anytime you're out visiting grandparents or parents or, serving together in a nursing home or some facility like that, I just think those are all field trips and such great learning experiences. And you learn, books are necessary, but when you're out in the world, you learn real life lessons. And I think that has such great value in our homeschooling, and it makes our kids' lives so rich and abundant, I think. So, what do you think is the biggest challenge of homeschooling?
So someone actually said to me yesterday as they were wishing me Mother's Day that they haven't seen a lot of moms dedicate themselves so fully, right? So the sacrifice of career, the battle in comparison, and even some of the overload, like what you said is back in your days, they didn't have that many options, right? Maybe there was Bob Jones University and one or two other options. Now we have so many, and the paradox of choice is that you can be overwhelmed because there's that shiny object syndrome of, oh, there's a new one. I need to do that. What's different about this one? So I think sometimes less is more in terms of how many options you have and how many things are being marketed to you. But I think it's the idea of, am I doing enough? That always lingers.
Yes, the buck stops here.
That's right.
You know, when I used to say, if my son gets a bad score on the math part of the SAT, I can't blame the crummy algebra teacher he had in school.
That's right.
Or, you know, you do feel that pressure of the buck stops here.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, sometimes I think of it and I'm like, okay, God, you call me to do this. And as cliche as it sounds, I know that you equip the called, right? So I know that intellectually, I know that. But sometimes in the moment, it feels like I have to figure this out, or I have to make sure that I'm checking all the boxes. You know, so you definitely want to remind yourself that God called you to do something that's so much more than academics, so much more than the textbook, but really understanding that homeschooling, while I get to redeem my education alongside my kids, it's really character building for myself. It's a trust and a faith walk with Him. It's modeling. Like I heard someone say, it's not what's taught, it's what's caught. And I'm like, can you just listen to what I say? Don't catch all the stuff. No. The last thing I'll say on that is maybe the juggling. There's a time management piece because you're juggling multiple roles. You're the mother, you're the chef, you're the nurse, you're all these things. So the importance of rest becomes really critical, making sure that either you're asking for help and building community or you're prioritizing your own rest. Otherwise you will burn out, but that's not God's will for us.
Yes, that's right. And I do think Joe and I first started homeschooling, and you know there was no real law on the books, there were no co-ops, there was no anything, and so people were very happy to tell me during the day when they would see me all the ways I was robbing or cheating my children of a real education, you know, if they were in real school. And it was like I had this alarm that went off in my head every morning at 2 a.m.
Oh, no.
And I would just wake up and I would replay all those conversations. And I can remember Joe was my best friend, my husband. So I knew he really wanted to talk to me about all those things, you know. So I'd wake him up every morning at 2 and say, honey, you're not going to believe what so-and-so said to me. And can we talk about this? And finally, after, I don't know, 4 weeks of this, Joe looks at me and says, Zanny, Jesus is always awake. And so yes. So it really hurt my feelings, but it changed my prayer life. And you know, I was up one morning. This is when the kids now were teenagers, and we had been homeschooling a long time, and Lizzie was younger. I don't remember who, but I was crying and praying over a particular child that night. And as I was praying, I thought, what is wrong with me that I can't get a grip on this, or, you know, I can't get my child to get a grip on this. And then I realized, you know, it's like you said, it's because we love our kids so much. I don't know of too many teachers. I wish I could think of one who cried over me and prayed over me at 2 o'clock in the morning.
That's right.
You know, it's because we really do love our children. And I think that we bear that burden because we love them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we just need to remember that we need to focus on progress and not perfection, because there's so many times when we're looking at either an assessment or maybe you're working on penmanship or math, like whatever it is. There's times when we're like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Do I need to push them more? Do I need to give them more praise? What is it? But we really need to get to the point where we're focusing on the small improvements and the small wins and not the 100% we've attained it all.
Yes, That's right. The progress, like you said, that's what we're looking for in education, and I think it's just exciting to it's exciting to see our children grow and learn and have that time with us, have that time with each other. So one other thing I want to talk to you about is flexibility, because I think this is one of the things. Okay, I've got to stop for just a minute. Isabella, can you still hear me, Ro? Okay, 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 good, because I've had so much static in my earbuds and all of a sudden it stopped. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. 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 So I want to talk to you for just a minute. Now I've got to stop and think what I was going to ask you, Ro. Hold on. So let's talk about some everyday strategies or practical tips you can give moms that make homeschooling more manageable.
Absolutely. So one thing else I'll talk about is maybe you don't have a strict structure where 8 a.m., 8:05, 8:10. You definitely want to give yourself some grace. But I will say maybe have a flow or a routine, because the flow helps to keep the kids informed of what's happening next. So it's kind of like an agenda, right? That's really helpful. And then the routine helps to build that kind of expectation of what's coming next. So maybe on Mondays you say this is what I have to do. On Tuesdays this is what you have to do. But flexibility is really important, but you have to balance that flexibility with structure. So you can have like that flow.
And I do love the flexibility that's built into homeschooling, especially more in the sequence than the scope, because we can determine when our child is ready to read. We can determine when they're ready or not ready for algebra, or when they're ready to speak a second language, or all of these things. We know what our children are capable of and what puts them over the edge. And sometimes if your child is struggling in math, it's just a matter of waiting a while and coming back to it. Or, maybe you started in the wrong level because you wanted them to be challenged, but it's too challenging.
Correct.
All these things, we're not held captive to a curriculum that's been purchased for 2,000 kids in the school district. We can turn on a dime and we can figure out how to make things work. What works with our kids, what motivates them, what demotivates them, all of those things.
I couldn't agree with you more. When I first started homeschooling, I just had the two boys when I first started. I couldn't understand how a teacher with 20 to 30 children could focus on kids, because I had two children with different learning styles. And I have two boys in front of me where one may, just hear something, they'll be able to regurgitate it, like you have auditory or kinesthetic. You have these different learning skills, and it's only two. Imagine having 20 children. People get left behind because you have the 10 over here who already know everything that you're saying and they're bored out of their minds. You have others who are just looking at you like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but if I smile and nod, you won't know, right? So I think that leaning into the fact that you get to give your child the individualized attention, that is one of the beauties of homeschooling. But going back to some tips, I think in addition to like the flow and the rhythm that you're creating, I love having blocks of time, because when I first started, I was like creating these small things, like in this 15-minute increment, you have to do this. Now I say between 10 and 12. So I have a 2-hour block for the children to complete something. And it actually gives them an initiative to focus, because if they finish early, now they're on a break. But Zan, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. The most important tip is to start your day with prayer and do a family prayer. So my kids have devotionals that they read on their own. And then they have to come to me and tell me what it was about. They have to tell me the scientific piece of it. Like, did you know that a microbe was XYZ and why that's important to God, right? So they'll ask me about that. But then they also have to tell me the spiritual part. They have to tell me, what does that do to your character? How can you implement this in your personal life today? What scripture did you read? So because they have two different ones, I hear from two of them. Then I can share with them what I learned, but then we do something together. And it's really important, not just because of the biblical spiritual piece, but it sets the tone. There are days when I've done that and I felt so accomplished. And there are days when I've skipped it unintentionally and did all the other things, and it didn't have the same amount of fulfillment.
Yeah, it was sort of empty. I know exactly. I know exactly what you're saying, and that is really very powerful. Very powerful. One of the things I want to hop back to is you were talking about children in a classroom who smile and nod because they don't have a clue what's going on. It was interesting because Senator Gazet, who sponsored so much of our homeschooling legislation in South Carolina, said something to me once. My oldest son is a successful salesman and he's quite charming. And he said, Zan, Ty is so charming. He's the type who could have just skated through school, charmed his teachers, and never learned a thing unless he wanted to.
That's right.
And he said, you catch him all the time in things because he laughed and he said, he does charm you, you know that. But also you know what he's getting and what he's not getting. And so there's just so many benefits to the relationship in the home. It's hard to quantify that or qualify that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell us a little bit before we finish up today about your work on the podcast, your work with CHAP, what CHAP is, and also in New Jersey.
Sure, absolutely. So CHAP is the Christian Homeschool Association of Pennsylvania. And for those who don't know, New Jersey has not had a state organization for the last 4 to 5 years. So when I started, we didn't have a state organization, and I kept looking like there has to be some umbrella organization that brings all this together. And I couldn't find it. So I reached out to HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and I said, I'm looking for some resources. I'd love to attend a conference. What do you have? So they told me about CHAP, which was the closest to me in Pennsylvania. And I attended and I was like, this is really great. This would be amazing. And I reached out to the board members and I said, I live in New Jersey, but if there's anything I could do virtually, I'd love to volunteer and just kind of serve alongside you. So I spoke to Ginger and her husband, Steve, and we had a great conversation. And I remember we spoke for maybe like an hour and change. And 5 minutes before we were about to hang up, Ginger said, would you want to do a talk show with us? Would you want to do a podcast? And I said, sure. Because for me, 2 things happened. One, God was telling me to start recording videos. And I told my friend, I said, hey, do you want to record some videos with me about her homeschooling journey? Let's just chronicle. And she was like, who is this for? And I said, I don't know. She said, what are you going to do with it? I said, I don't know, but I feel like God wants me to do it. So I did. And I had probably like 6 or 7 just lined up before this conversation with Ginger. And I didn't know, where that was going to go. But the second piece is I am curious. I love asking people questions. I love knowing why people do the things they do, why they made those decisions. And now I have a real reason to do it than just be nosy.
Right, yeah.
So it was like a perfect fit.
That is so awesome. So you do a podcast with him. Is that once a week or?
So we used to do a weekly podcast. Now Ginger and I share the time. So she has 2 on Tuesdays. I have 2 on Tuesdays. So we're bi-weekly now. And she has Chatting with CHAP, where she talks about legislation and things coming down the Pennsylvania pipeline. And then I do everything from homeschooling curriculum to homeschooling tips to marriage, children, just like the slew around homeschooling. So fast forward, I remember just sitting down and thinking, and God was talking to me about restarting the organization for the state. And I was in New Jersey, and I was like, I know this is not me because I have too much on my plate to even think about this. And through a series of events, I just kept getting reconfirmation that this is where he wanted me to go. And I remember when HSLD was doing their State of the Nation calls, they sent an email saying, if your state wants to host something, please let us know. And I reached out to my attorney and I said, we don't have a state org, but I'd be happy to host. And I hosted 2 alongside the attorney. And one person reached out to me from that and said, hey, I've been thinking about starting up a state org. And God connected us that way. And then 2 other families reached out. So we've just been meeting, talking about what we want to do, how we want to support our families. So Homeschool New Jersey will be back very soon.
That's fabulous. I can remember, I think it was Enoch of New Jersey. Yes, because I spoke there a couple of times. And so we just had such a great time in New Jersey. And I'm so glad y'all are working to resurrect that. I think that's really powerful, powerful stuff. Um, and why do you think, let's talk about this for just a minute, Ro, before we finish. Why do you think homeschooling organizations, state organizations, are important?
So, for a couple reasons. One, you talked about freedom and all the things you had to do when homeschooling was illegal. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that freedom is not free, and they don't really realize that they have to fight for it. So, because of people like you, because of organizations like HSLD and CHAP, because of Enoch and all the work they did, we just get up in New Jersey and we do whatever we want to do because of our freedom. But people don't realize that we have to fight to keep that. So I think homeschool organizations are important. Even if your legislation is very low regulation, it's important for someone to be kind of like that watchdog and that support. You don't want to get ready when something is happening. You want to be prepared and be proactive. So that's one of the things. Another thing I would say is there's a poem from a pastor, and it talks about, I won't go through the whole poem, but it says, when they went for this group, I didn't say anything because I wasn't that group. When they went for the trade unionists, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. But then when they came for me, there was no one there. So that's why I think it's important for all of us to rally with HSLD, rally with people like you who are fighting for our freedom, so that when they come for these various states, we're already in place and that we can have that freedom.
That is so true. I think Caleb and I talked about this in our last podcast, but we get the feeling that freedom is just something that's just going to always hang around, and we're going to have it without working toward it. And but we've seen 4 states that have had significant threats to their homeschool freedom this year, and 2 with some of the best homeschooling legislation in the country. We've seen it in Virginia, Connecticut, Illinois, and Minnesota. And so we have got to be, eternal vigilance is really the price of freedom. And I'm so happy to hear you say that, because as a state, a home education, compulsory attendance, homeschool laws are done at a state level. So every state needs its own watchdog organization that is going to help us protect that freedom that was so hard won. It's a whole lot easier to protect what you have than to lose it and have to regain it. That I can tell you from personal experience, that is not a fun process. Important, but very time consuming. So we need to fight and keep what we have. So, Ro, in closing, if there was one thing you'd like to say to homeschool moms and dads, what would it be?
I'm going to say what I hate when people tell me, and that's to trust the process. Whenever someone tells me that, I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what is the process? Where does it start? I can't go with the flow. Like, where is the flow? I really start to understand what people are saying. Like, God has us on this journey. This whole thing is a process. Just remember, maybe I'll say this, remember why you started, right? Because we get into something and we forget the reason. We start chasing all these other things. We're chasing the curriculum, we're chasing the co-ops, we're chasing the organizations and the sports and the language and the music, the instruments. But is that why God called you? Did God call you so that you can make your kids athletes? Did God call you so you can make your kids musicians? Remember why you started. I know, right? The academic piece. So remember why you started. And if it was really for the biblical worldview and the Christian worldview, then focus on that. If it was to bring your family closer and closer to God, then focus on that. So granted, you can have multiple reasons, but remember why you started and use that as an anchor when things get hard.
As somebody said, I was looking at some reel on the internet, it is not all unicorns and butterflies.
Or rainbows and sprinkles. It's not.
Yes, yes. And we do have days like that are so amazing. But you are going to hit those hard days when education is a long process. It can be a glorious process, but you're just going to have good days and bad days. And when you remember those whys, and they have an eternal component to them, it will motivate you. Well, Ro, thank you so much for being with me today. And tell me how people can find you if they want to get in touch with you or hear what you have to say.
Sure. So I have a website and it's my name.com. So I'll spell that. It's RoseanneUwague.com. RoseanneUwague.com. And if you have questions about or coming soon Homeschool New Jersey, feel free to email us at hsnj, like Homeschool New Jersey, hsnjboard@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to connect with you.
Oh, that's perfect. And before we close, I just want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. I want to thank them for providing us with a curriculum that is laced and woven with biblical worldview components and thought throughout. And tell you, if you have any questions about homeschooling or using a curriculum with a biblical worldview, you can go to homeschoolhelp.com/map. Click on the map of the state you live in and find a consultant, a homeschool mom just like you, to help you. And you, as always, you can find me at zantyler.com or on social media. So, Ro and I want to thank you for being with us today. We know you have a lot of places you could choose to spend your time. So we pray that God continues to bless you and your family. And we'll see you next time. Bye.